Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to talk about Brandon Ingram and the New Orleans Pelicans today as we talk about maybe some potential trades. What could we see for Brandon Ingram? And prior to talking through some of those potential trade frameworks, what I really wanted to do was cover Brandon Ingram myself, talk about why he's potentially available via trade and why he hasn't been traded yet, because he is a very talented player who has put up a lot of numbers in the past and has been a productive winning player, especially since going to New Orleans in the trade that sent Anthony Davis to the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, if you guys do enjoy the content you see today, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you are new, it'd be great to have you be a part of what we do here. And now let's get into that big question. Why is there such low value around Brandon Ingram right now? And really, it all starts at the fact that he has an expiring contract making $36 million this season for the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, that $36 million mark is not crazy. That's not too much money for Brandon Ingram. The issue is when you look at the potential contract extension that he could sign right now between today and June 30th of 2025, which is a 4-year, $207 million contract extension, which the annual average value on that breaks out to roughly $52 million per season. Now, if he doesn't sign that prior to the end of this upcoming season or prior to June 30th before 2025 NBA free agency, then if he were to re-sign with New Orleans, he could technically sign a 5-year, $269 million contract. But based on how New Orleans has been operating, remember the DeJounte Murray trade and the absence of an actual extension thus far for Brandon Ingram, the likelihood here is that Brandon Ingram will not sign an extension with New Orleans anytime soon, if I had to guess. And if he does sign an extension, it will not be worth upward of $50 million, although his camp, his agency, and himself would obviously love to get all of that guaranteed money on a giant contract extension. But New Orleans, understandably, is very hesitant given their current cap situation. They already have over $100 million committed for the 2025-2026 season to CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson, whose contract is technically non-guaranteed, but he'll be there, and also recently acquired guard DeJounte Murray. And this upcoming offseason here, not only is Brandon Ingram a free agent, so is Trey Murphy, who is a restricted free agent and someone who could really get a large contract offer out on the open market because he is a very talented two-way wing who can shoot the basketball at a very high clip with very good range. He's capable of making plays off of a live dribble. Now, he doesn't do it a ton, especially in New Orleans, hasn't been asked to do it a bunch, but he can attack closeouts extremely well. I think there is more playmaking juice there for him to fill into. And because of that, he's likely going to also get a big contract, whether it be from New Orleans or another team. Now, the Pelicans do have the ability to match that offer sheet that he would ultimately maybe sign with another team, but that does put pressure on them from a cap table standpoint because of the amount of salary they have committed long-term to Zion and DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum for an extra year after this season. There's a lot of money already on the books, and if you give Brandon Ingram $40 plus, $50 plus million dollars a year, and then you're maybe paying Trey Murphy $25 to $35 million a year as well, you can see how their tax bill would ramp up very, very quickly. So there's a lot of pressure there just from a contract standpoint. And then you look at Brandon Ingram's injury history as well as another big concern. After his rookie season where he played 79 games for the Los Angeles Lakers, Ingram has yet to play another season of 70 plus games. So he's been well below that 70 game mark pretty much every single year since then. A lot of seasons finishing in the 50s for games played. So that is a big concern as well. Not only are you committing a lot of guaranteed money to him if you do extend him, but he's also a player who has missed quite a bit of time in his career. So not only does New Orleans have to factor that in, but so do the other teams, which is why his value around the league is relatively low right now. And he just had some of the worst basketball performances of his career in the playoffs. Now, I think we have to give him a little bit of a pass here. Not only was he being defended by Lou Dort for most of that playoff series, but he was also freshly coming off of an injury as the lower seeded team against the 1 seed in the Western Conference, the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are a great defensive unit. Ingram really struggled though. Averaged only 14 points per game, terrible shooting efficiencies, in that playoff series. Now, to be completely honest with you, I'm not putting that much stock myself into that playoff performance, because you go back against the Phoenix Suns in his most recent playoff showing before this past season, he was stellar against the Phoenix Suns as they stole 2 games in the first round of that playoff series against Chris Paul, Devin Booker. It was a really great series for Brandon Ingram. Shot over 40% from 3, shot nearly 50% from the floor in that 6-game series. So he's been shown to be a playoff performer at times, but again, he's only played 10 career playoff games, so it's very difficult to fully make that bet on him in my estimation. Now let's go to the flip side. What is some of the positives about acquiring Brandon Ingram? Even though his points per game dropped this past season, he actually did showcase a lot of talent and really showed some improvement as well as just a 26-year-old forward in this league. I know he's been in the league for so long, it feels like he should be way older than 26. He's only 26 years old presently as I record this video, and he is coming off a year where he posted career best in the following categories: assist to turnover ratio. He has continued to grow as a passer and a facilitator. We'll talk about that more in a second here. He had the best plus minus of his career, the best net rating of his career, and also the best offensive rating of his career, as New Orleans kind of reshifted their offensive identity this past year, playing with more zoom action, obviously a real changing of their scheme and overall format of their offense. As a result, Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, their individual scoring tallies went down, but the team offense as a whole actually improved, especially with Ingram on the floor. Their offense was very, very good, as Ingram had the best offensive rating of his career, played within that system, and then also he posted the best effective field goal percentage of his career as well. So even though some of his raw efficiency numbers weren't as great as they've been, an uptick in three-point volume definitely did help his effective field goal percentage as well. He gets to the line at a decent rate. There is still a lot of talent here for Brandon Ingram, which is why I want to talk about his skill set. Before we even get into any of those trade frameworks that we're going to talk about, I want to talk about who he is as a player. We all know Brandon Ingram to be that mid-range assassin, get to his spot and knock down that dribble pull-up jump shot over quality defenders, over bad defenders, and over good defenders as well. He just has that unique length, size, skill component that has, throughout many times in his career, led to comparisons to Kevin Durant. Now, let's be completely honest and transparent. He is not anywhere near Kevin Durant as the individual talent, the individual scoring caliber of player, but he is still a freak, an awesome, great offensive player. And with his scoring ability from the mid-range area specifically, he's also been able to step out behind the three-point line a little bit more, knock down perimeter three-point shots, but he's also really developed and grown as a paint finisher, and I think that's one of the most overlooked areas of his game and how he's really improved since his rookie season in LA 6-7 years ago to where he's at today now. Playing through functional contact, playing stronger than he looks, obviously with a slim, slight frame. That was a very big question coming into the league. I think he's really filled himself out well, and he also does a good job kind of avoiding contact, playing off of 2 feet a little bit more, and getting to spots on the floor around the rim to create layup and dunk opportunities for himself. And he's done a good job adjusting to playing with and without the basketball as well. So offensively, you're getting a fairly polished score on all 3 levels. Predominantly that mid-range area, and then from there getting to the rim and then shooting threes off of those 2 things. But that is a good offensive player to get. And then the biggest growth in his game, in my opinion, since coming into the NBA has been his facilitating. He's really improved and grown as a passer year after year after year. Earlier I talked about his assist to turnover ratio and posting the best of his career. He's a very, very good passer now at this point of his career. He has the ability to use his eyes to manipulate defenses, can throw no-look passes to open up slight angles that he needs to get a pass into cutters, or the ability to use his scoring gravity, a lot of times attracting 2 or maybe even 3 defenders by filling the gaps or getting flat out double teamed. He does a good job getting off the ball when he's supposed to, and in some ways is reminiscent to Kevin Durant in that way, where Kevin Durant, you double team him, he uses his length and size to pass over the top of the doubling defender. Brandon Ingram does that as well to a certain extent, and he's by no means a selfish player with the ball in his hands. So if you are trying to acquire Brandon Ingram, he's a player who can fit around other young talent, be a quality contributor for your team in that way. So now let's get into those trade frameworks after we talked about why maybe his value is a little low. why maybe a team would still want to go out and acquire him, and we talked about his skill set. Let's get into those actual trades here now, and this is where the value needs to make some sense for both sides. In all these trades, we've talked about why Brandon Ingram would be a good get and why he would be maybe not as strong of a trade candidate as you would maybe think because of the lower value currently. This is a trade here for the Utah Jazz to land Brandon Ingram because of his talent. This is a pure talent grab for Danny Ainge. Getting him alongside Lauri Markkanen, they're similar ages, very similar timeline here. This is just flat out a talent grab for Utah, and for New Orleans, this is kind of a confession that they're not going to pay Brandon Ingram long-term if they make a trade like this. They instead kind of kick the can down the road a little bit here, get contracts that are a little bit smaller than Brandon Ingram, in players that could probably fill roles for New Orleans this upcoming season, fit within the structure of their team and their offense most specifically, and get some draft capital in return here as well. So you get John Collins, a player who a year ago really didn't have much value. We saw that when Danny Ainge acquired him from the Atlanta Hawks for what was basically a throwaway second-round pick and a salary dump. John Collins now gets rerouted here to New Orleans, who I think could really utilize his talent after trading away Larry Nance in the DeJounte Murray trade. I think John Collins could be very valuable for the Pelicans as a dynamic dive and pop big man for them in their zoom action offense. Now the Pelicans do have a bit of a question mark at center right now. Yves Missi maybe is going to be the starter. We'll see what happens there. I still think Yves Missi is quite raw, but New Orleans is in a spot here where John Collins could actually fill a functionality role for them. Jordan Clarkson gives them some of that shot creation, that dynamism with the ball in his hands that they're losing with Brandon Ingram. Now Clarkson is a significantly worse player than Brandon Ingram. Don't get me wrong here. It's not like you're filling that void completely, but you are replenishing some of that talent that you're losing in this deal. And obviously with DeJounte Murray already in the fold, you've kind of already made a bet on another shot creator anyway, which makes Brandon Ingram a little more replaceable in my opinion. And then the 2025 first rounders here from Minnesota and Cleveland, both of which you would expect to be in the 20s. Cleveland has been a very good team, finishing in the playoffs both of the last 2 years. Minnesota has been a playoff team the last few years as well, including the number 3 seed in the Western Conference last year, winning well over 50 games. Minnesota projects to be a great team once again. So yes, the quality of draft picks here isn't great for New Orleans to get back, but you are getting 2 first-round picks in a relatively strong 2025 NBA draft class. I think this is more than fair value for New Orleans. You keep some of your trade flexibility alive going into next year with guys like John Collins and Jordan Clarkson who would become expiring contracts. You have extra first-round picks to work with, whether you do that this trade deadline or next offseason. And you're not losing as much talent because you are getting 2 veteran contributors here. And for Utah, it's really a bet on, hey, we're getting the best player in the deal. We're getting a player who has been an all-star in the past, has showcased the ability to consistently produce off the bounce for himself and for others. This is a good trade for both sides. I do prefer it for Utah because I think flat out they're getting the best player in the deal without having to give up too much of their long-term future. The Jazz already have a ton of young talent currently on their roster, so I think they can safely dispose of those 2 upcoming first-round picks without jeopardizing or sacrificing too much of their long-term upside, because they still have upside bets in guys like Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George, of course, drafted Isaiah Collier at the end of the first round, Kyle Filipowski in the early second round this past year. The Jazz have a lot of young talent. Obviously, Cody Williams is another name to mention. But getting Brandon Ingram, I think, would be a significant upgrade on the wing for them. They need more forward-type players, more forward-sized players. And I think Ingram, probably a more natural fit next to someone like Walker Kessler than John Collins has been so far as well. So I think this is a good trade for the Utah Jazz, and one that I could see New Orleans ultimately doing if they decide they are not going to pay Brandon Ingram that big time money on a long-term extension. Something Utah would probably be a little bit more willing to do themselves with their own current cap table situation. Let's jump forward now into trade number 2, and in this one, we do see Brandon Ingram heading to Portland, and this is a fascinating one for me for a few different reasons. The Portland Trailblazers are not a team you would think of as currently looking to buy talent. Obviously, they have Scoot Henderson. They just drafted Donovan Clingan, and that's kind of what frees up this deal. New Orleans, I talked about their questions at the center spot. Is Yves Missi going to be the day one starter? How does that look? Does that work very well in year one? I don't really know. So they get another 26-year-old in return, someone who's already under contract for a little bit longer. Again, this is about kicking the can down the road a little bit for New Orleans after losing Jonas Valanciunas this past offseason. They're able to bring in DeAndre Ayton here, a center who I don't like that much. I think is an okay player, not a great one. This is, I still think, a talent loss here for the Pelicans, but it does free up some of their long-term problems with the cap table, at least currently, by kicking the can down the road again and saving a little bit of money this year, a little bit of money next year compared to what Ingram's extension number would be, and you get a collection of second-round picks. Not the most valuable thing in the world, but 4 second-round picks, you can definitely use those, go out and maybe acquire depth, or use them to help you make other deals later if you want to trade up in the first round at a future date. You might be able to do so with 2, 3, 4 of these second-round picks. You could add them together. And for Portland, again, we talked about Brandon Ingram's ability to not only play with the ball in his hands, but also his growth as a player without the ball and as a functional passer as well. I think Portland, after going out and getting Denny Avdia, has already greatly improved their wing position, their forward spot there in Portland. But after drafting Donovan Clingan, still having Rob Williams on their team, their center room is very, very full. We haven't even mentioned anyone like Duop Reith, who I think played decently well for them last season. I don't have a lot of faith long-term in Duop Reith, but I do think he can be, a third-string center in the NBA. I think Brandon Ingram for Portland does make a good deal of sense. This is, again, a talent grab here without jeopardizing any first-round picks. You're not hurting yourself from a real long-term draft capital standpoint. Yes, you are trading out a bunch of second-rounders, but I've already liked the aggression that Portland has shown to go get someone like Denny Avdia, who is a very good fit there. Now you just need to find more talent. I think this is one of those things that's going to help Scoot Henderson greatly develop. Last season, he played with a bunch of guys who, to be honest with you, are not NBA caliber talents, especially not starting caliber players. Getting an established veteran player like Brandon Ingram, who still has maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years left of his prime, fits pretty well with the Scoot Henderson timeline. You're never going to find a perfect fit timeline-wise, but you're going to get a very good fit here timeline-wise, and a player who has the skills to go get a bucket when you need one. This greatly improves Portland's team, helps them kind of figure out really what they have with Anthony Simons. What do they really have with Scoot Henderson? What do they have with Donovan Clingan? This opens up the door to Clingan and Robert Williams co-sharing the center spot. Both of them probably playing 24, 25, 26-ish minutes per game. Obviously, Time Lord's dealt with injuries. Donovan Clingan, one of the big questions around him right now is his endurance and stamina. How many minutes can he play in the NBA? Nightly, that's a big question, but I just think at this point in time, you can safely move on from DeAndre Ayton. Use second-round picks to do so. Portland gets, in my opinion, again, the best player here. New Orleans addresses their long-term cap table problem and gets a starting center for this season. Although I don't love him as a player, I do think he is presently an upgrade over Yves Missi, and it gives them a little bit more time to focus on Missi's development for future upcoming seasons. Trade number 3, Brandon Ingram this time finds his way to Brooklyn in a kind of fascinating deal, and one that looks a little bit different, but probably my favorite trade so far for New Orleans. They get Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith plus a 2025 second-round pick. You might be saying, why would Brooklyn do this? Brooklyn has just recently committed to rebuilding. They got some of their own draft picks back. Why would they go out and acquire a talent like Brandon Ingram while giving up some other talents? Well, first of all, they get younger here. Cam Johnson's actually 28 years old. Dorian Finney-Smith's into his early 30s. And the 2025 second-round pick, you can definitely expose of that if you're Brooklyn without having to really be too long-term concerned. And this gives the Nets one more half-court scorer, one more half-court creator who could be very valuable alongside Cam Thomas there in Brooklyn, who is slated to have a fantastic season. The Nets were also able to retain Nick Claxton. So if you're looking at building block foundational pieces of the Nets organization, not only do they have their own pick back for this upcoming season, which could maybe turn into a super high quality player, super high quality draft prospect, maybe a Cooper Flagg, an Ace Bailey, a Nolan Traore. There's a bunch of different names. VJ Edgecombe could be interesting. There's a bunch of players that Brooklyn could be in the running for in the 2025 draft. And you get a little bit younger and I think a little bit more talented here acquiring Brandon Ingram. Again, this hinges on the fact that New Orleans would not want to pay him, keep him long term. And instead, the Pelicans get players who are already under contract and fair contracts out of that. Dorian Finney-Smith, a little bit more than the mid-level exception currently. just under $15 million this upcoming season. He's got an extra year of team control there as well. And then Cam Johnson, multiple years left of team control at a little bit under $24 million this upcoming season. You safely and effectively split Brandon Ingram's contract into two pieces instead of just one. You get players who can fit long-term. It gives you more flexibility to retain Trey Murphy long-term. You don't have to do anything with Herb Jones. The Pelicans already have so much talented perimeter defense. You get even stronger here with Dorian Finney-Smith in the mix for your current present-day team. And I think, again, the important thing being the fact that they already have DeJounte Murray. You're not as worried about the shot creation element as maybe you would have been 10, 12 months ago trading Brandon Ingram. Now it's about finding players who would fit long-term there in New Orleans around Zion Williamson, around DeJounte Murray, and around CJ McCollum. Cameron Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, both of them fit very, very well for New Orleans. And again, for Brooklyn, this is an upside grab. This is a, hey, we want a little bit more talent in the building. And guess what? If Brandon Ingram misses games this upcoming year because of injury, Brooklyn's not going to be too upset at that either, as they look to try and really focus on the 2025 NBA draft. And maybe a year from now, we're talking about the Nets with Brandon Ingram, Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, Cooper Flagg, or maybe Ace Bailey. You're looking at a really talented group of four players there. Maybe they walk out with Dylan Harper from Rutgers, or maybe they walk out with Nolan Traore from France. You never know, right? They could have four really great players, whether it's a forward addition in the draft or a guard addition in the draft. Either way, Brooklyn really couldn't go wrong there. Brandon Ingram could be a core piece for them over the next 5-6 years as we kind of transition to the next iteration of Brooklyn Nets basketball. Trade number 4, we see one here with the Golden State Warriors. And again, this is all about stepping into a situation, trying to win games now for Steph Curry, trying to really contend for a championship one more time in his career. Now, this is a little bit of a weight trade for New Orleans. This isn't like these other trades where you're getting a 2025 first, or you're getting, two players who presently fit into your roster construction very, very well right now. This is more so like, hey, we're taking in some salary here with Andrew Wiggins. We're notably getting a little bit worse, right? I'm not going to deny that. But you're getting maybe a crown jewel asset a few years from now. And this is something you have to wait for. But if you're David Griffin, you probably feel like you have good job security. You're waiting for that 2028 first. What do the Warriors look like 3 years from now? Are they a team that is completely bottomed out? Are they a team that would be sending us maybe a top 5, top 10 pick in the 2028 draft? Yes, you have to wait a while to see that result come in. But given the current state of the Golden State Warriors, the aging of their current roster, the lack of true dominant young talent. Now they do have Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody. They do have some nice young players, Brandon Pajemski as well, someone I love. Trace Jackson-Davis, another prospect I love coming out of Indiana. I do like what Golden State has for young talent, but is that enough to win 40, 50 games in the Western Conference year after year after year? Maybe, maybe not. That's a big question. So that 2028 asset could be the best asset potentially New Orleans could land for Brandon Ingram. Andrew Wiggins, listen, he had a very bad year this past year for Golden State. I'm not going to deny that, but I also don't think he's a horrible player. I just think at this point he is a downgrade for New Orleans, but he could fill a role for them. He could serve a purpose there for the Pelicans in a lesser extent than what Brandon Ingram does. You get Gary Payton II, probably not too much of a factor here, but for the Warriors, you get a significant talent increase into your starting lineup. Another guy who can create his own shot after losing Klay Thompson's floor spacing. Ingram's ability to score the basketball could be very valuable for them. I think especially in the half court when the game slows down a little bit, it just feels oftentimes like, hey, hopefully Steph gets open running through off-ball screens, and guess what? If he doesn't, we don't really know what to do from here. Ingram is maybe a guy who could solve some of those problems a little bit for Golden State. I don't think it completely reshapes their team. I don't think it completely solves all of their problems. But for this price package, this cost, I think they could justify it internally, making a trade like this. And for New Orleans, again, you're sitting around waiting for that 2028 first. Maybe that's what becomes the crown jewel asset, again, out of all of these trade packages I have here today. Going now into our fifth trade, and it is one with the Toronto Raptors. And this is, again, a little bit more of a stopgap trade for New Orleans, like we talked about a little bit earlier with some of the other options. Very similar, I think, to the Brooklyn Nets trade. Now, you're not getting quite the talent that you were from Brooklyn with the Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith players, but you're getting Still 2 rotation players for sure. One of them addresses a big need for you, which is Kelly Olynyk playing kind of a point center role for your team. You think about their dribble handoffs, playing out of zoom action, playing with your center, having the ball around the top of the key as the hub of the offense. Olynyk's playmaking feel could fit in extremely well there for the Pelicans with the way that they play offensively. Bruce Brown, another guy who could kind of serve as a de facto screen and role player, something he does extremely well as a guard, which is always fun and unique to watch. But he's also improved drastically as a shooter over the last few years of his career. He shoots relatively well from the corner. And obviously gives some defensive intensity and juice. He rebounds pretty well for a guard. And again, you're getting a little bit extra team control here on Olynyk. Bruce Brown, probably you could agree to a long-term contract with him at some point. He's probably not going to be making $23 million a year, probably closer to anywhere between $12 and $15 million. So if you're looking for some cap relief here as New Orleans, this is a deal that could make some sense if, again, all hinges on not planning to keep Brandon Ingram. If the Pelicans want to keep Ingram long-term and they're hell-bent to do so, Ingram will be in New Orleans. But if David Griffin and company are, kind of skeptical about wanting to keep him, then this is where deals like this make sense. You also get an Indiana first in 2026, something Toronto acquired from the Pascal Siakam trade a few months ago. And the Raptors, again, this is a talent grab. The Raptors roster is pretty weird right now. They've got a lot of collection of pieces. They made the big trade with the New York Knicks to get, obviously, RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly. They still have Scotty Barnes. They traded for Jakob Poeltl a year ago, right, from San Antonio. They've got this collection of talent, this collection of pieces that I don't think any of them really fit together super smoothly. They just lost Gary Trent Jr. in free agency for nothing. This is a talent grab. This is Masai Ujiri looking at the team and saying, hey, look, we can add a former All-Star for the cost of 1 first-round pick and maybe 2 guys who aren't going to be here for the next 4 or 5 years. I think this makes a lot of sense for New Orleans if they're just looking to get off of Ingram long term and they're not planning to pay him. And I think most of all, this makes a ton of sense for Toronto from a talent perspective of let's get as much talent in the building, just like we talked about with Utah. Danny Ainge doing something similar. Acquiring talent and acquiring talent for cheap is always going to be a very good move in the NBA, especially for a 26-year-old player who I think is capable of being a very high-level scoring option for a team come playoff time. The Raptors probably aren't going to be a playoff team, but Ingram still a big-time talent grab for them. Someone who I just think having the ball in his hands is going to be better than what Toronto has presently with a lot of their other options. So Ingram, Scotty Barnes, maybe that could be an interesting two-man unit going forward. Obviously, Emmanuel Quickly is going to showcase a lot of his development and talent this year as well. We'll see what we get from RJ Barrett, but I do think Toronto could be a sneaky team to watch for Brandon Ingram in the upcoming months if he does ultimately get traded. Now you're going to notice there wasn't a lot of trades to real contenders. There wasn't a lot of trades for high-end playoff teams. No Philadelphia, no Boston, none of those kinds of teams in here. That's because of Brandon Ingram's contract extension issue. That's because of the new CBA. It's just hard to find teams that are going to want to get Brandon Ingram that are already really, really good. Because are you going to pay Brandon Ingram to be your third, fourth best player, $50+ million? Probably not. It's very similar to the Zach LaVine issue right now in Chicago, where Chicago doesn't want to give Zach LaVine away for nothing, but at the same time, you don't want to pay Zach LaVine $50+ million either. And that's why teams aren't really willing to give up a ton for him at this point in time either. I think Brandon Ingram finds himself in a very similar spot. You might say, looking at this video, say, well, all of those trades were underwhelming. That's kind of the point. That's kind of how this is shaping up, which is why Brandon Ingram hasn't been traded yet. But if he's going to be traded, it's because New Orleans doesn't plan on keeping him, and it's because New Orleans finds an offer that they think is acceptable enough for his talent. Now, if I had to bet, I think Brandon Ingram probably stays with New Orleans this upcoming season. I think the Pelicans play it out, see how it works between him, DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, and then maybe next offseason, that's when they try and pivot. Either keep Brandon Ingram, trade CJ McCollum, or maybe just risk losing Brandon Ingram for nothing in free agency. Definitely a real possibility, one that I don't think is super smart for New Orleans, but I think that's kind of how they've locked themselves in currently with the fact that we're in middle of August right now. There's no deal done currently for Brandon Ingram, and I'm not sure if one's going to materialize. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content, especially if you're new here. I'd love to have you be a part of what we do. Links in the description for the Twitter and the Discord. Go join and follow over there, and we'll catch you guys in the very next Utility Sports video.